My name is Duke Mertz, and in this, the first of two presentations on the Exodus sect, I'm going to discuss Old Testament mysteries. The scribes who wrote the first books of the Bible drew upon the oral traditions of all of the Hebrew tribes for the stories of the patriarchs. The evidence is clear that some of the material came from ancient rites practiced by a shadowy sect. The name of the cult has been lost to time. I call it the Exodus sect because the term combines its two major aspects. Sect refers to the type of religion it was, a secret society known as a mystery cult, specifically a Hebrew mystery cult. In my book, I show that the Exodus could never have happened as written in the Bible. Nevertheless, the original impetus for this long-lost faith came from Egypt. It began with the mysteries of Osiris. We can follow the spread of the cult of Osiris from Egypt to the other civilizations in the Middle East and Europe. As the rites were disseminated, an existing local god was preempted to fill the shoes of Osiris. It helps to think of the spread of the mystery cults as an early religious revival movement. Even though the rites of the mystery cults were supposed to remain secret, scholars have been able to identify certain tenets they all held in common. First and foremost, the rites were held at the spring equinox, usually over a period of 3 days. The god revered by the worshippers was the Son in a Trinity. Usually the Father was the supreme god in the region, and the Mother was a human virgin. Does this sound familiar? The mysteries consisted of a mystical pageant or drama where the Son was born against the wishes of the god of the underworld. In most pantheons, the god of the underworld was second only to the supreme god, and therefore the newborn Son preempted him as next in the line of succession. For this reason, the god of the underworld orchestrated the death of the Son. The Son was resurrected with the help of initiates who underwent a sympathetic death and rebirth through baptism. The rites included a communion meal of bread and wine shared by the attendees with an actor known as the Hierophant who portrayed the Son of God. The Hierophant was supported by 12 additional players who acted as disciples. In many of the traditions, the 12 disciples represented the signs of the zodiac. It is interesting that Jewish esoteric literature also equates the 12 tribes of the Hebrews with the signs of the constellations. As mentioned earlier, there was an initiation ceremony for new members. There were additional ceremonies for higher levels in the sect, which we will investigate later. Many of the cults used the call sign of the cross or the fish. The fish apparently represented water in recognition of baptism, and as we shall see, the cross referred to all levels of initiation. There are mystery cult images of crosses that predate Christian iconography by centuries. In the earliest books of the Old Testament, material from the northern Hebrew tribes use Elohim instead of Jehovah as a name for God. Elohim is an ancient Semitic word that portrays a male and a female deity in the act of procreation. In a patriarchal society, their issue would be a son, so the word itself designated a trinity. The Phoenician deities involved in the Elohim triad were El, the supreme god, Anet, a perpetual virgin, and Baal, the sun. In the Bible, Baal was worshipped by the most notorious leaders of the northern Hebrew tribes, Ahab and Jezebel. The name Baal appears at the end of Hannibal, the Carthaginian nemesis of Rome. Similarly, the supreme god El is featured as a suffix to many biblical names. This includes the patriarchs Israel and Ishmael, the prophets Samuel and Ezekiel, as well as the angels Michael and Gabriel. And let's not forget the infamous queen Jezebel. The triad of El, Anet, and Baal was revered by the Phoenicians just to the north of the Holy Land. So it was no coincidence that the northern Hebrew tribes used the word Elohim as their name for God. When we investigate the early biblical heroes and eliminate those parts of their stories that were folk tales borrowed from other sources, what remains behind are mystery motifs. Let's focus on three patriarchs who are identified by Jehovah contractions. Since it was frowned upon to speak God's name, it was common to combine it with another element. So we have Joseph, God plus, Jacob, God's heel, and Benjamin, son of God's right hand. Let's see what happens when we eliminate the Egyptian folk tales that make up the bulk of Joseph's story. The tale of the two brothers is the source of the story of his master's wife, who charges him with attempted rape. The 7-year periods of feast and famine come from the annals of Imhotep. The legend of Psammetichus is a tale of 12 men who sell one of their number into slavery in Egypt. Later, the enslaved man rises to a position of command and confronts his former companions. After we have eliminated the magical elements of dream interpretation and divination cups, what is left of Joseph's story? It is the tale of a magistrate who returns monetary payments and demands that Benjamin be brought before him at a banquet. At first, Jacob refuses to allow Benjamin to attend. In order to convince him to comply, Reuben inexplicably volunteers to sacrifice his own 2 sons. This harkens to an ancient Hebrew rite of redeeming the firstborn son that was part of the pilgrim feast of unleavened bread. It is part of a spring rite, and it concerns the redemption of a son, just like with the mystery cults. Benjamin's name means son of God's right hand. The right-hand seat next to the throne was reserved for the son and heir to the king. Benjamin's name therefore means son of God. His conception was immaculate. God heard Rachel's prayer and gave her a child. As was the case in many mystery cults, his mother died, giving birth to him. At the banquet, he is given 5 times as much food as anyone else, like the fatted calf. And with the refusal of the monetary redemption fee, we assume that he is to be sacrificed. This is just one example of how the biblical editors constructed their stories from folk tales and half-understood mystery cult motifs. When the Jerusalem priests assembled the first books of the Bible, they picked through the oral traditions of several Hebrew tribes. Abraham, Isaac, Israel, and Joseph were the exemplars of God in the triads of 4 such traditions. The only way the Jerusalem sages could make sense of the characters in the legends was to create a line of patriarchs from them. Let's look at the legend of Abraham, whose name means father, and the redemption of his son Isaac. Supposedly, a ram was caught by its horns in a thicket so that it could replace Isaac on the sacrificial altar. However, textual analysis of the verses indicates that the story of the ram was an afterthought. In the original rendition, Isaac was actually sacrificed. Now let's turn to the triad formed by the 3 principals in the Exodus saga. There is Moses, whose Egyptian name means son. His birth is a retelling of the legend of Sargon, whose rush basket was found by royalty on a river. Then there is Aaron, more properly translated Aharon, in Hebrew a word eerily similar to Abraham, the father. The woman who was originally the mother was Miriam, who was called a prophetess. Mary in Egyptian means beloved. There is one final player in the Egyptian saga. Joshua's name is a Jehovah contraction that means God's Redeemer. He was also known as son of Nun, which means son of the fish. Here we have the call sign for mystery cults as well as early Christians. Joshua was also connected with the ancient rite of circumcision, which originally was a mystery cult rite of passage. However, in the centuries before the Common Era, this rite fell out of favor with the Exodus sect. In order to investigate this change in mystery cult rituals, we will need to turn to our analysis of the New Testament, the second presentation in this series. As we shall see, Joshua became important in other ways. It turns out that the Greek version of his name is Jesus.